Hello, this is Ken Ferry with this week's Boots in the Field report. Things continue to chug along this week. We're seeing some new stuff develop though on the disease front, along with the Goss's wilt, which we continue to find, and the Physoderm brown spot, which in some fields is pretty tough, and of course the big one, GLS. We're starting to see more movement of the tar spot. About 2.5, 3 weeks ago, the guys found it in a field up north of Peoria, and now we've identified tar spot as far south as Hayworth. So that's the furthest it's come in that direction. So we're starting to see a wider adaptation of this disease, and we'll continue to monitor to see if we can eventually figure out which varieties are doing better with it. Also this week, it's easier to find northern. So the cooler temperatures and moistures brought northern as well as common rust. So things are changing out there. Pest teams be kind of keeping an eye on it as far as especially this June corn, which we may have to pick it up with a fungicide or at least start preparing for harvest with the amount of pressure. Ear molds are also present. Start to see some diplodia ear molds. And the other thing we saw this week in the ear side was some fields got significant earworm damage. I've been in a couple of fields that I would say 80 to 90% of the ears have some earworm damage. For the most part, the earworms are gone, but they've left damage behind, and you're starting to see some tip mold. So remember, as you're scouting out there, the earworm and bird damage we're more likely to run into things like the aflatoxin issue. So we don't want to end up with a bin full of things that we can't sell. But for the most part, the diplodia ear rot has been very limited to certain hybrids and corn on corn, and of course that diplodia would have came in with wet weather during pollination. Now we do continue to fight the war on aphids in this June corn, but we did see some things this week that finally give me some hope that Mother Nature is going to show up. So we have found some lacewings and ladybee larvae, and most of it, of course, is where we've received the rain, but the rain is starting to turn the tide for us. Mother Nature is going to be here, I think, to help. We did find 2 fields this week where we had diseased aphids, and the diseased aphids looked like they were going to take out the population. So not all the corn's in the clear, but there is indicators where we did receive rain that we might be making finally the swing back in the other direction. Yield checks in the dry area to the north this week. Again, we're checking corn from 130 to 220, so it really depends on what kind of range you got and what kind of root systems you had underneath it. Locally here in the Hayworth area, rain amounts of anywhere from 3.5 to over 6 inches in the last 2 weeks. So that has really kind of set us up and locked and loaded a lot of this yield, meaning that I think we'll have enough now to get ourselves in really good shape, especially the soybeans. We really needed that rain, and I think it did come in time for the most part. Locally here, we're yield checking in that 210, 250 range, and I have more confidence with this moisture now to lower that divide number. That's what we talked about earlier. If you have your kernel counts, you can watch the weather. Where we've been getting the rain, I'm more likely to now start dividing by 80. We just need time, and we need some heat. In the beans this week, we saw some of the first visual signs of sudden death, and that was in the April beans. Haven't seen the sudden death in our May or June beans. Don't expect to see a lot in the May, June beans because they get out of the ground pretty quick. Those April beans, some of them spent over 20 days on the ground, so we're going to put them under some pretty good pressure, even if they were treated for sudden death to start to show up. We are finding more aphids in the beans this week, so pest teams be on watch, especially these beans that are still only R4, R5. Keep an eye on it because this aphid population could give us trouble like the corn population. So we finish out the week in north central Iowa, up around Osage, Iowa, and spent the whole day here with Joe Melichek and some of his customers and taking a look at the crop. And Joe, as we went to all these fields today, one thing is pretty clear is things are getting a little tight here from a moisture perspective. I can see it was the opposite earlier because we can pick up tile lines. So dealing like the rest of us, you must have been wet in the spring itself. Today we saw corn that's 15 days from black layer all the way out to 40, 45 days from black layer. Probably most of it at least 30 or 35 days out from black layer. Is this corn up here, do you think it's going to make it? And what's led to the conditions as far as where we are today, what we're seeing out here? And how do you feel about the crop compared to an average here in Osage?
Yeah, so I guess are we going to make it or not? It's going to depend a lot upon October, and we're going to need a lot of some weather that's going to be favorable for us to finish this crop, especially this late planted corn that we have, as we saw today. And you ask about what got us here, and I think it was our April and May, and it went clear into June where we just couldn't shut the rain off, and a lot of delayed planting, a lot of planting that was put in conditions that probably weren't the best.
Now, one of the things that was also very prevalent today in just about every field we were in, and that was some pretty crushing disease pressure. The physoderm brown spot was almost in every field, and some of the heaviest physoderm, I thought we had it heavy in Illinois. I learned today that you can have physoderm 3 leaves above the ear, especially in this corn on corn, and a tremendous amount of common rust and of course a little bit of gray leaf, but more northern showing up. We saw fields today that I think, even though they're sprayed with the fungicide, are going to come apart before they finish. What were the weather conditions to bring the amount of disease that you have up here that we're seeing?
So going back to that physoderm, I think came back from the early season again. The heavy rainfalls, lots of rain, and just seemed like it was just raining all the time. The disease, the common rust that we've seen, some of the northern, I attribute that to having the conditions that are favorable for that. We had moderate temperatures, didn't have the hot, dry weather. A lot of mornings with heavy dews, sometimes in fogs in the morning. Just seemed like we were setting ourselves up for things. The recipe was right, and we started scouting fields before we started pulling the trigger to apply fungicides, and things just came together. And as you saw today, they're continuing to light things up.
Yeah, and usually when we see cracks in the ground and we see corn running out of water, we're not too much worried about some of these diseases. But I'm assuming that while you didn't have the rain, you must have had some wet mornings and fog issues and stuff like that.
Yes, early morning fogs that were hanging around for a while. You just knew that it was that was the day that the disease was going to be spread.
I've seen some fields today that really probably should have been sprayed a second time. It's kind of hard to do that when you're talking about June planted corn. And where do you think the yields are in general here, as far as what's the expectations of your customers compared to the average, I guess?
I agree with what everybody else is saying. We're going to be off. There's going to be some good corn in spots. However, you drive by down the road and it looks pretty good. I've had the opportunities to be up in the air in airplanes the last couple weeks, and it's humbling to see it aerially, these fields. We all know what zeros do to yield monitor averages. It takes all day to try and bring that average back up before you hit that area. So I'm convinced, or I feel, that we are not going to raise the crop that we normally do.
Driving in here this morning, I was seeing a lot of nitrogen deficiency. As far as not every field, but a lot of the fields are now starting to show the nitrogen deficiencies up at the top. Now, most everything that we're in today actually looked pretty impressive from a nitrogen side. What are the big differences here in the neighborhood that are making such a difference between one field and the next?
Guys that are split applying their N, and the fields we're looking at today are all that situation. The split applications of N, a lot of guys moving to a weed and feed type situation, some planter applied, and then coming back and side dressing, whether that's wide dropping or side dressing. Those are the fields that we saw today that look pretty healthy. Our fall applied ammonias, or everything loaded up front as a pre-plant, just with as much rain as we've had, just couldn't hang on.
The one field we're in where we were kind of blonde all the way to the top, and we shucked back those ears, and there was went from 45 long to probably 22 long. There was a massive abortion on the tip. That was kind of scary. If some of these other fields look the same way, there's probably going to be a pretty good surprise for the guys that aren't out of there actually looking at that corn.
Exactly.
Well, Joe, I appreciate the time, and hopefully you'll get out there this fall and you'll call me back and say, man, well, we don't know where this crop came from, but it's sure here. We'll be expecting the best.
I hope so. Thanks.
To stay up to date, check out our website at croptechinc.com and subscribe to our podcast, Boots in the Field Report. Keep her safe, keep her moving.